What's going on, guys? It's been a while since I've made a video over here. I've been still making content over my Miami Dolphins channel, Miami Dolphins Syndicate. I have a link below down there if you're a Miami Dolphins fan or you just want to support me in general. Made a video a few months ago, thought that might be my return to making videos over here on the main channel. However, yeah, that still didn't happen. And here we are today. I thought the best way to come back is to sit down and talk about a very interesting, March Madness bracket. We just saw the entire field released. There's some very notable inclusions, some notable exclusions, some winners, some losers, and I thought this is my best way to come back, have a conversation with you guys, break down the bracket, and take a look at how things just might unfold come the tournament time. So first thing I want to do is take a look at the best seeds, the top seeds in the tournament. The number one seeds are UConn, North Carolina, Houston, and Purdue. No particular order. I just read them based off here on my phone. And I knew going into the Selection Sunday today that it was going to be very difficult to get a marking on who the number one seeds were going to be, as there was quite a few teams that had a claim for those spots. We knew that UConn undoubtedly was going to get the number one seed, number one overall seed in the tournament, as they've been one of the best teams all year, just consistently in that top three. I believe they held the number one spot for the longest duration this season. And like I said, they were the only team of the number one seeds to win their conference championship game. And that opened up a wide range of outcomes. And I think for the most part, the committee got it right. The biggest gripe that I have with the decision-making process with the number one, number two seeds is Iowa State not only not getting a number one seed after handily defeating the University of Houston in their championship game, but they are now going to be in the bracket with the number one overall seed in UConn. And like they mentioned on the broadcast, I understand Iowa State had some tough losses earlier on in the season, and it looks like the committee was pretty consistent throughout the entirety of the bracket with the weight they held with the conference tournaments. It looks like the conference tournaments did not hold a massive impact in terms of moving teams up and down in this bracket. Clearly, the most obvious one, like I just mentioned, is the Houston-Iowa State line, where Houston loses in the championship game to Iowa State, and Houston still maintains that number one seed. You're looking at Tennessee, another team that potentially could have been a number one seed. They were listed as the best number two seed, and they lost pretty early in their tournament. You look all up and down this bracket, and it's lined with teams that lost earlier than they should have. We're looking at Purdue. We're looking at Duke. We're looking at Kentucky. And when you have everybody losing early, when you have everybody getting upset, is it truly an upset? Is it truly unjust to see these teams not move down based off losses or move up because of wins? Because of just the volatility that occurred during conference championship week, I understand the committee's decision to hold that entire week lighter than they usually would, especially with teams getting in that weren't supposed to. 5 teams, I believe they said, was the amount of teams that got in that had they not win their conference, they wouldn't have made it in at all. So that just throws a wrench in things entirely and makes it really hard to break down these teams and make the needle move too much based off of the tournaments, especially for those number one, number two lines. I think within those number one and two lines, you do have the 8 best teams in the country, with UConn and Iowa State in that first top bracket, North Carolina and Arizona. I'm not a big Arizona fan. I'm not a big fan of teams that have to get hot and shoot a high amount of shots in order to win games, because all you need is one game. All you need is one game for those shots not to fall. And we see that every single year. Teams that have a high volume of points, once they go into the tournament, they just have that one game where their top scorer isn't getting it for them. And that's where I find concern with Tennessee, and that's how they ended up losing in the conference tournament to Mississippi State. Dalton Knecht, when he's not on fire, when he's not hitting his shots, they do struggle to find point production on a consistent basis from the rest of the roster, with their next highest scorer just at 12 points per game. But continuing going down that number 1 and 2 list, you have Houston and Marquette. I'm not a big fan of either of those teams to win the entire tournament. I think that is the weakest portion of the bracket. The weakest quadrant of the bracket is the Houston and Marquette quadrant, and then you move down to Purdue and Tennessee. I do think those are the 8 best teams in the country. However, with what we just saw in the conference tournaments, I think there's a lot of room for upsets going into this tournament. Now, with some winners and losers, and like I already talked about a little bit, I think the biggest loser of the seeding is Iowa State getting the number 2 seed in the number 1 quadrant with the number 1 team in the tournament, that being UConn. You look at that quadrant and it is a mess. Obviously, you have the top seeded UConn Huskies. You look just a little bit lower and you find fellow Final Four teams from the previous season, FAU and San Diego State. FAU is coming off of a loss against, I think they were 11th seeded Temple in their American Athletic Conference tournament, but that game could have gone either way. And had a pass been caught by FAU's backup big man, they probably go on to win the entire tournament. They're slotted as the 8th seed there. You have San Diego State, like I just mentioned, a team that's very tough, returning a lot of the players that they did last year. Illinois, 2 very consistent scorers on that team with the mask and Terrence Jr. In the 3 slot. You're looking at a very tough opening round game against, actually, sorry, I was looking at the above team. I was looking at Drake at Iowa State. San Diego State, I'm not going to act like I know too much about them. But just those teams that I have mentioned, as well as BYU, Yale, they were a hard-fought team in their tournament. That game came down to the line in their final. Very tough quadrant. I think that it definitely is the strongest quadrant of the bunch, which is interesting when you have the number 1 overall seed in there. There's a lot of teams in there that you could make a case making a Final Four run, including 3 teams that just did it last year. So Iowa State, you got to feel really hardened if you're them that you do not get a number 1 overall seed. And then on top of that, or not just number 1 overall, you don't end up with a number 1 seed. And then on top of that, you end up in my opinion, the hardest quadrant of the 4. On the contrary, one of the biggest winners, in my opinion, was the number 1 seed over in the Midwest bracket being Purdue. You look at what their road to the Final Four is likely going to be. You look at the number 4 seed in that bracket, which is the team Kansas, that has sustained quite a few injuries at the end of the season, and that has significantly hampered their play, dropping game after game in the latter half of the season. They have a really good chance to be upset early on as they play Samford in the first round, but then Gonzaga playing McNeese. 2 very tough teams, 2 teams that can score, and Kansas coming in with arguably the worst momentum of any school in this tournament. I can see them getting upset very early on. And then, like I previously talked about with Tennessee, when Dalton Knecht is not firing on all cylinders, where he usually is, that's why he's one of the best players in the country, likely to be a top 10, at very worst, a lottery pick come the NBA draft. Tennessee relies so heavily on them and on Dalton Knecht, and that's what we've seen, a stark difference from their play last year to this year. Last year, they were known a lot more as a defensive team that still was able to score, but then we saw last year against FAU, the scoring drought comes around. They find themselves losing some games that they should win, and now they have that go-to scorer with Dalton Knecht. But then you look around the rest of that bracket, you have the 10 line of Virginia and Colorado State. Virginia, I don't think truly really belong to be in the tournament at all. I think there's a really good shot that they get upset by Colorado State. South Carolina, a very hot team. However, you just look at that entire quadrant, and I think this is the weakest of the group. And then you're Purdue. You're coming off of a year where last year you lose to Fairleigh Dickinson in round 1, and was only the second time a number 1 seed has lost in tournament history in the first round. There's a great chance for them to regroup. You have either Montana State or Grambling that you're going to play in the first round as a 16 seed. I got to imagine that that is not going to repeat itself. History from last year is not going to repeat itself, and they get past them, and they get to play either Utah State or TCU, 2 teams that they deserve to be there. They deserve their 8 and 9 line. However, I do like Purdue to get at the very least to the Elite 8. We see time and time again the NCAA tournament that the champions are usually found with guard-heavy teams. So with Edey being their best player and one of the best players in the country, I'm very intrigued to see if they can go against the grain, get to a championship game with a big man as your primary scorer, as your best player on the team. But if I'm Purdue, I'm looking up and down that quadrant saying we can win this. Now, if I'm looking at this bracket, trying to figure out who the Cinderella team could potentially be, who could be the FAU from last year, and while I don't think it's quite in the same nature as a team like FAU, who last year was a mid-major school coming from Conference USA, I do have a team from a Power 5 conference that, had they not win their conference, had them not won their conference, would not be in this tournament at all. A team that has already seen this team with their current head coach make the Final Four. I'm looking at Dana Altman, and I'm looking at the University of Oregon. Oregon is really hot right now. Earlier this month, they lost to University of Arizona by 20 points, and since then, they won their conference tournament. Like I said, had they not won their conference tournament, they would not be in this at all. They can find scoring from a variety of sources, including N'Faly Dante, who went perfect from the field in their conference championship game against Colorado. You have 5 scorers in the double digits, including 2 bigs, 3 guards. So you see a variety of scoring from the perimeter, from smaller players, from slashers, as well as the ability to get the ball down low in the hands of your bigs. They are in the weaker side of the bracket, in the weaker quadrant, in the Midwest quadrant, like I previously talked about, where, yes, Purdue, I do have obviously favorited to get to the Final Four, but we just talked about how Tennessee is very reliant on one player themselves, and there are some tough players or some tough schools in there. However, if you are going to be at the 11 line, I'd like to be in this Midwest region. I like Oregon's chances to get out of the first round, taking on South Carolina, and then from there, you're playing either Creighton or Akron. Creighton, a team that is a great regular season team every single year with this Creighton team. We know they can score. We know they can compete in their conference, but they always find a way to fall just short. And Oregon, a team that has experience in head coaching, is a team that is on fire right now. They've got pretty much everything going that I'd like to see. They're healthy. They've gotten healthier as the season has gone on. This is a perfect recipe for them to continue the hot streak they found in the conference tournament, moving now on to the big dance. So now for my predictions for the Final Four. And last year, we saw no number 1 seeds, no number 2 seeds, and that was a pretty entertaining tournament overall. The better teams falling early on in the tournament, and that is a dream for most college basketball fans. However, this year, I do think the Final Four will be more top-heavy than it was last year. Starting off in the East region, where I have the UConn Huskies, simply put, the best team in college basketball. They've been the best team for the majority of the season. I have them getting back to the Final Four, and then you move down to the West, same nature, same energy. Number 1 seed, University of North Carolina. I have them getting back to the Final Four. I can see a world where Arizona gets hot. Caleb Love, I don't think he's ever seen a shot that he doesn't like. But when it comes down to that potential Elite 8 matchup between North Carolina and Arizona, I do like the experience of that North Carolina squad that they have coming off of a down year last year, missing the tournament entirely. Moving over onto the right side of the bracket with the South region, this is the region where I do have the hardest time picking amongst the bunch who is going to represent the South region in the Final Four. Because, and to be particularly honest, I don't love one particular team on this side of the bracket. Houston, the last time we saw them out, we saw them get demolished by Iowa State. Now, if Iowa State was over here in this bracket, I'd probably pick them to make it all the way to the Final Four. But that's not the case. Houston gets the number 1 seed over them. I'm actually going to go with Marquette and Shaka Smart to finally get back over the line, back into the Final Four, since of course he took VCU back to the Final Four all those years ago. I think the combination of scoring, as well as he's started to come into his own as a head coach. I say started coming into his own, but I mean he's been around the block quite a few times now. Down the Midwest region, I have a hard time trusting Purdue. I really do. I have a hard time trusting them, but I'm going to give it to Purdue. It's going to be Edey's last opportunity to make it to the Final Four. You have a very experienced team, and that's what I think is going to be the nature of this Final Four. You're going to see the teams with the most seniors, the teams that are at the top and that have been at the top for the majority of this season in the Final Four. So I'm going to go with Purdue. So that is a matchup of Purdue and Marquette on the right side, UConn and North Carolina on the other. Man, that would be delicious. And from the East region, or from the left side of the bracket, I'm going to go with UConn making the finals And then adversely on the right side, I'll give it to Purdue. And then a heavyweight matchup of Purdue and UConn, resulting in UConn going back to back as NCAA champions. Let me know your predictions down below. I'm super excited for this tournament to get underway. I'm super excited to hopefully make content more regularly on this channel. We'll see if that happens. I make zero promises. However, we'll see. Let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know your upset predictions. Let me know who you want to win, who you rocking with this tournament. All down there, please hit that like button, that sub button. Y'all know what to do. Have a great rest of your day. Take care, everybody.